everyone, and welcome to the next session. I'm Wendy Almeida with Discover MarTech, and I have the pleasure of introducing the next speaker. But before we get started, we have a few quick tips for you. If you want to increase the size of your slides, click the box in the upper right-hand corner. You can click it again to shrink it. If you have any questions, type them into the Q&A box during the presentation. After the presentation, the speaker will reach out to you directly and answer your questions. There are additional resources from Insighten in the resources box, as well as a PDF version of this slide deck. Take advantage of exploring and downloading these resources. Now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter. John Wallace is the Product Strategy and Marketing He's in charge of the product strategy and marketing at Insighten and has spent over 20 years with enterprise security, working with some of the largest organizations in the world to deliver technology and solutions. At Insighten, he owns product strategy and marketing, where his deep technical background allows him to map the company's technology solutions to true market needs. John will be talking about the risk third-party website components pose for compliance and data privacy. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction, Wendy. I'm happy to be presenting today and looking forward to giving some information out there. So hello, welcome to this presentation from myself and Insighten. As Wendy said, my name is John Wallace. And today we're going to talk about the risk of third parties and what they pose to your website, both in respect to compliance and security. Almost every website in the world makes use of third parties in some form or another. And during this presentation, we're going to explore what we mean when we say third parties, why you just can't remove them for your site to alleviate the risk, but what you can do to minimize the risk that they pose yourself, your organization, and of course your website. So today's websites are incredibly rich and immersive and a part of almost every aspect of our daily lives, everything from shopping and banking to social interacting and dating. Modern websites today are very different to those websites of the past, which largely consisted of static text and images. In fact, today's websites are often the product of thousands of lines of code from many different developers. And actually, many websites, many website code bases consists of both in-house built code, but also homemade code as well that comes from amateur developers, or developers that arguably are sat in the garages of their homes. The reality of it is that when you go to your bank and pay your electricity bill, under the hood, if you actually inspect what's going on, under the hood, the browser's probably brought code from a myriad of different places around the world and interacted with numerous different organizations, in addition to your financial institute. So, as I said, the average website today utilizes third-party code, and in fact, the average website utilizes somewhere between 40 and 60 third-party libraries to bring capabilities from simple user interface enhancements like animation and things like that, but also to full-on customer interactions or payment processing like within a shopping cart. The website CDNJS.com, which is a popular code content delivery network used by a vast array of websites, currently hosts the code of around 3,400, 3,500 different JavaScript libraries. And if you actually go into those libraries, you'll find there's over 100,000 different versions, different code versions across the code bases of those libraries. As a marketing professional, we may recognize some of these technologies shown here, and we'll be familiar with tools such as Google Analytics and the various tag managers that you use. The reality is that these are third-party technologies that are present on websites today. And while some of these technologies are backed by massive trusted organizations like Google, some of them are the product of university thesis projects maintained by a couple of teenagers in their free time, or a dispersed set of developers from all around the globe that that happen to contribute code when they've got a minute or that they feel is cool at that point. I'm not saying that any of these libraries specifically are bad or are malicious, but there are thousands upon thousands of libraries out there by millions and millions of developers, and largely these libraries and the developers are not really vetted. They're certainly not known to your organization. But irrespective of their origins, developers today include the code bases, include these third-party code bases within their websites, and many of these and the thousands that are out there available are probably present in your website today as well. So with that in mind, and I appreciate I might have gone very low in the first couple of slides here, so let's just take a step back and understand, well, what are third-party libraries? Third-party libraries are basically files that contain code and content and are included in your website by adding a tag. If you look at the source of your website and go to like the header section of your website, you'll see various scripts and CSS files and maybe font files, etc., all included. And these are what are called tags. And these bring down content either from your servers or from third-party servers that are out there. So when marketeers, for example, use a tag manager to add components to your site, they are in essence including a third-party library, which in itself brings down additional libraries. And tag managers are very, very popular and bring immense benefits to managing a website. But they typically come from a third party, and then themselves, depending on the libraries that you as a marketer select, they bring additional third-party libraries down as well. Now, when a visitor comes to your website, your content, the HTML content that you create, your scripts and everything like that, that's delivered to their browser. It's delivered to the user's browser. But then the browser goes into those files and it looks for all of those little tags, and then the browser downloads the additional components, the additional scripts and CSS files and images and everything that you bring from all of these different locations. The browser downloads all of that. And then once it's all assembled, that's when the user sees your website. Now, most of the time, these third-party scripts or these third-party tags that you reference, not only is it code that's created and maintained by something different, but the libraries themselves come from a different location to your website code. Your website code is typically stored on your servers, but the third-party tags you may bring from other CDNs or other locations, and this all comes together in the browser and creates what the users see. And these libraries can be very simple and contain just a single line of code, for example, or they can be vastly complex and contain many thousands of lines of code. And as we've already said, these libraries are really designed to add functionality to your website, negating the need for your developers themselves to have to write that code. So to understand this further, we'll examine a typical website and the components that the website may use from a third party. And really the question to ask when we go through these next few slides is, do you yourself know where your customer data is going? If you were to map all of the interactions of your website, do you actually know which third parties are interacting with the user data on your website when it's rendered in the browser? And do you know what data is actually flowing between those third parties? So I've just taken a random website here from the internet. It's actually, I think it's called furbabycouture.com. It sells clothing for pets. And I'm using this as an example to highlight why you would actually utilize third-party components or third-party libraries. And the reality is that when a visitor comes to the website, the browser retrieves all of the parts that make up the website that you've created, your HTML, your JavaScript code, your images, your style sheets, etc. All of these components are then delivered and processed by the browser to create and display the interface that users interact with. Now, tags contained within the HTML files, as we've explained, are designed to bring down additional content. And the browser will look at these tags and they'll bring down that additional content. So every time you go to a web page, you're bringing content down from the servers. We've already said this. You're bringing content down from the servers and also a myriad of other servers that exist out there on as well. So, for example, one of the external components that you may use is Google Analytics, a tracking and telemetry technology used by a vast majority, a vast number of websites out there. In this case, before the website is displayed to the user, the browser will go and download the analytics code from Google. This is a JavaScript library that is designed to track certain elements about your website and to store information about the visitor. This is code that Google has written that is designed for you to download, or rather to be downloaded by your users as part of viewing your website, and then it does things. It does operations on your website. So once the browser's downloaded this code, it'll then display the website. At which point the Google code is sat in the background, tracking user activity and storing that information, so you can go and look at your website analytics. Another third-party component is the shopping cart. So in order to actually purchase items, I'll go through the catalog and I'll select maybe a nice hat for my dog or my cat, and then I'll click add to cart, and that'll go into the shopping cart. Now, the shopping cart functionality, as a website owner, I've probably not developed that myself. I'm going to go and use a third-party shopping cart component to do that. And the way I do that is I include the shopping cart tag inside my HTML files. What happens then is the browser downloads the shopping cart code from the provider who created it, after which the cart functionality appears as part of my website. The code, along with providing the virtual cart, and also processes the checkout function, which is responsible for communicating with external entities, for processing my credit card numbers and everything like that. That code, that functionality, is delivered from a third party. That code becomes part of my website when it is sitting, or when it is being accessed by the user. Website also has a virtual chat agent, as you can see here. This is probably delivered from another third-party provider. The chat agent allows user interaction. It offers to help people locate products and resolve other issues, maybe with billing or shipping and things like that. But the code that sits behind this agent is utilizing a third-party service to process these queries, to interpret what the user's typing, to turn that into language that the artificial intelligent bot can interpret. All of that code exists and is being managed by a third party there. And in fact, if we were to analyze the website, if we were to analyze all of the third-party components that the website either utilized or downloads content from, it's actually quite remarkable. And the chart that you see here is really just highlighting all of the different connections that the web browser makes when it is actually viewing, or when it is navigating to furbabycouture.com. So it's making all of these different connections. Now, those connections themselves, and we'll talk about this shortly, but those connections, those libraries, or those third-party providers that you're making connections to, they in turn can also make their own connections as well. And you can kind of see some of this in in this chart here. So as we've spoken about, and hopefully highlighted there, your website itself is designed to utilize your own content, but it'll also reach out to various third parties to obtain code, obtain content, perform certain things like, again, interpret a user typing into a chatbot, and so on. And the third-party tags that you use on your website can also utilize their own downstream content. We call these fourth, fifth, sixth, etc. Party content as well. Now, as a website owner, as a marketer, you may not be aware of this. Your website just works and it operates. Your developers have done a good job at creating the website. But the reality of it is that when it comes to things like compliance, you may have implemented a very good approval or consent solution on your website, but have your users actually given consent for all of the third-party providers that you're using to sell their data as well? So, if a user allows you to sell their data, so they've not ticked the box that says opt out for selling their data, do they intend that that choice also applies to all of the different third parties that you're talking with? Because here's the thing, any data that is on your website is technically accessible to those third parties as well. Those scripts can read what the user is typing in. They, in theory, can look at a whole page and capture that information, and so forth. So if your users don't allow you to sell their data, can you be sure that the third-party components are also honoring that choice as well? Can you be sure that those scripts are still not harvesting that data, and then down the line they're selling it on? The reality of it is that you as an organization are actually responsible and liable for non-compliance, even if it's one of the third-party components that you're utilizing. In terms of CCPA, in terms of GDPR as an example, it's your website, and all of the components that you use are part of your website. So if data happens to get leaked by one of the third-party components that you're using, well, you're on the hook for compliance penalties there. So the risk of third parties in a nutshell, if you were to take one slide away from this presentation, as a marketer, as a website professional, what should you know with respect to third parties? And the reality is that from a security perspective, when everything goes down to the browser, your content, third-party content, fourth, fifth, sixth-party content, and so on, from a security perspective, they're treated no differently. They all have the same level of access to the web page. They can all read the same data. If a user is typing in their username, password, address, date of birth, social security number, credit card number, any third-party script that is present on your site can read that data, can access, can take that data away and do whatever they want with it. Now, I'm not saying they do. I'm not saying that any of the third-party components on your website today are malicious. I'm saying that they have no barriers to preventing that from happening, and you're responsible for it. Within the user's browser, as we said, they can interact with the site content without restriction. The other thing as well is they're often delivered from locations and servers which has no security audit, compliance validation, or oversight. What I mean by this is that you obviously vet your own security. You put attention in it, you purchase software solutions, you hire people to look after the security of your website. But you use components from various other places that you have no insight or oversight of. You can't turn up to one of their data centers, for example, and say, let me inspect who has access to the web servers. Or the people that are actually creating the code, as I said, could be a teenager in a bedroom. Have you done a background check on them? Do you know who they are? Do you give the same vetting to those developers that you do your own developers that you employ? They have the same level of access technically to your website, but you don't treat them the same in terms of checks. And the final thing is that they're produced and maintained by developers, like I said, who you have no business contract with. There's no, NDA in place. There's no non-compete or privacy agreement or anything like that. You have no contract with them. There's no restrictions in terms of what they can do in theory, and they could be from countries potentially out of legal jurisdiction as well. Technically speaking, one of these developers could be in, I don't know, North Korea as an example. I'm just picking that as an example country there. And you could be using code that is put there by one of those developers. So the third parties do carry a significant risk, especially when you consider that their inclusion in your website generally means that that you are introducing code, at least to the user's browser, that potentially has access to user information. And it's not just compliance issues as well. Criminals actually exploit third-party scripts to steal your customer information. You may have heard about MageCart attacks. You may have heard about web skimming attacks. I think various organizations have suffered breaches where hackers have been able to do what's called skimming of credit card numbers. And this is basically the way a skimming attack would take place. As we've explained in the day-to-day operation of your website, typically your code, your content is delivered from your servers to the user's devices, whether it be a desktop device, laptop, or mobile device. And along with that code is all of the third-party components that you use as well, that are coming from the different third-party repositories that you're using. Now, let's say an attacker manages to breach one of these third-party components, or a malicious actor, and inject some malicious code into one of these third-party components. Well, then that malicious code is also delivered down to the user's browser. It bypasses your servers, so you have no visibility into it. It's downloaded directly alongside your code from the third-party location as well. But it's all has the same level of access inside the user's browser. Well, then what happens is that code monitors, it waits for users entering their information, like a credit card number, at which point it siphons that data off, sends it to a server that in turn allows the hackers to get that information and sell it on the dark web. The more third-party components that we use basically expands our attack surface and gives hackers more avenues that they can target to try and inject malicious code into our website and to steal our information. And skimming code today, even now, is present on a surprisingly large number of websites. In fact, using a research tool looking for a server called CDNJSCO, which is a domain that's known to host web skimming code controlled by hackers, we find a bunch of websites that currently today have tags referencing the malicious URL. In the screenshot here, we can actually see 24 web pages that contain that domain. And CDNJS.co is actually one of hundreds of domains that are used by web skimming attackers. If we actually bring up a couple of examples from that list, if we were to look at the components of the website using the browser tools, here we can see a file masm.js, which on the surface just looks like an innocuous third-party library, for example, but deep inside that code, hidden away, is skimming code that actually monitors for users entering in their credit card information, and then it steals that credit card data. Again, there's another one. And these are examples of third-party libraries that have been infected or injected with malware specifically to do skimming attacks. But the thing is that third-party code is essential to the web. It brings significant benefits, but it also brings significant compliance and security challenges. The CCPA lawsuits have already begun. You know, we're starting to see the teeth of CCPA now. GDPR has been out for a while, and we've seen the big suits that's associated with that. But CCPA is also starting to rear its head now. We've seen Zoom hit recently in in this year with a class action lawsuit because of their data sharing with Facebook. And also we've seen litigation against other organizations as well. So lawyers are starting to get onto the CCPA litigation bandwagon. And the reality of it is that CCPA itself allows some fairly significant penalties to be given. So the potential rewards for a plaintiff actually make suing a company quite attractive. So how can Insighten help your organization mitigate the risks that are associated with third-party libraries on your website? As I've said, you're not going to be able to get rid of third-party libraries because they bring immense benefits to your website. But you want to mitigate, you want to eliminate the risks, the data theft risk, the compliance risks that those libraries bring. And I guess there's a couple of questions. The first is your current CCPA messaging and opt-out mechanism on your website complying with CCPA? And does your third parties or fourth parties or fifth parties, are they enforced as well? Does that messaging apply downstream? Insighten can help you with your compliance. Our technology allows the standard do not sell and opt-out functionality and enforcement. Now, the opt-out functionality is the boxes that you see there that allow you to opt out of selling your data. The difference with the Insighten solution is that choice is also then enforced on the third party, fourth party, fifth party, etc. components that you use. If your user chooses that, no, you are not allowed to sell my data, then those components that you use will not have access to that data as well. It enables the disclosure of your information. It tells your users what you're doing with their information, why you're tracking their information, whether you're selling it, whether you're not, who you're interacting with, and so forth. From your perspective, it provides you with the documentation. It provides you with the documentation that you need to prove that you're in compliance with CCPA as well. And it provides you with full event level reporting and opt-out notice collection or choices that were made. And as we've said, compliance is only part of the solution, and really it's weak without the enforcement side as well. Blocking or accepting that choice on your website is one thing, but you need to enforce that choice on the third and fourth and fifth parties that you make use of downstream. And then from a security perspective, are you sure that the third-party components that you use can be used to breach your website? And again, Insighten can help you with this. As you can see here, we're using the diagram that I took you through before with one different part, and that's the big stop sign there. This is where Insighten technology kicks into action and prevents any data that a third party is attempting to steal. It prevents that data going to that third party. In essence, even if one of these third parties that you're making use of gets exploited, gets breached, and you're not aware of it, the attacker would not be able to use that code to access, read, consume, steal the data that's present on your website or being entered in by the users. I'll happily talk more about this if you want offline. Obviously, we only have a limited time to go through this, but we're more happy to go into more depth and explain how this technology works if that's something that you wanted. So why choose Insighten? Why choose our organization to help your website? The reality is that Insighten is the leader in website security and compliance. We've been in business since 2009 and been doing this since our inception. So we're a mature organization that has created technology that not only provides you with a secure and compliant experience, but one that is performant as well. Whenever you do anything with a website, it's important that your technology is performant and doesn't affect the user experience. We have over 200 enterprise customers ranging from some of the largest organizations on the planet to some of the most active websites that are existing today as well. In fact, 6 out of 10 of the most valuable global brands, according to Forbes, use our technology to help them with their compliance and with their compliance and with their security. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. I invite you to go to our website and request a demo and learn more about our technology, learn more about the risks of third parties and how we can help. And with that, I'm gonna hand back over to Wendy. And thanks, guys, for your time. And like I said, get in touch, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks again, John, for the really informative presentation about third-party compliance issues. Really, really great. As a reminder to our audience, you can download a copy of John's slide deck in the Resource Center at the bottom of your viewing screen. Stay tuned for the next session, which you will find in the Engagement Hub. Thanks for watching.